Do you want to know how to buy a house in Boulder, Colorado? Well, today we're talking about my top 5 tips, and we're starting right now. Hey everybody, Barney Villa here, realtor with Remax of Boulder here in Boulder, Colorado. And if this is your first time on my channel, you're gonna wanna subscribe because I post content weekly about all things real estate in Boulder, Colorado. So in today's market in Boulder, it's not only competitive, but we have a serious lack of inventory. So not only are there a limited amount of homes available, but there's going to be high competition for all of them. So you're going to want to stick around and learn my top 5 tips on how to buy a house in Boulder, Colorado. Tip number 1 is to do some research first. And especially if you're coming from out of state, there are a few things you want to know about the different locations here in Boulder versus the price points here in Boulder. So there's Boulder City proper, and then we have all of Boulder County. So when we talk about Boulder City proper, these are going to be the most expensive homes where the average is over 1.2 million. But the further you get out and you start visiting really nice towns that are in Boulder County, like Louisville or Superior or Lafayette or Lama or even Gun Barrel or 9 you know, the price per square foot comes down dramatically. So if you want to be in the city proper, great. And that's a great way to narrow your search down. But sometimes we do want to take a look at those other towns, you know, to get a better picture of how you want to spend your budget. Tip number 2 is to make a list, especially if you're a husband and wife. I know me and my wife were sometimes not on the same page. So if I make a list and she makes a list of, say, your top 5 must-haves, or maybe even your top 10 must-haves, then you want to come together and kind of look at what are your top 3 must-have. Maybe it's a 2-car garage. Heck, maybe it's a 3-car garage. Maybe it's a large backyard. Maybe it's 2 stories. Maybe it's a ranch. You know, so if you can really figure out what your top 3 things are that you want, everything else can have a little wiggle room because there's no such thing as a perfect house. Even with new construction, you're still going to be like, gosh, I wish that wall wasn't there, or I wish the basement was more open. We didn't want to put these bedrooms down here. So don't think of it so much as searching for the perfect house, but think of it as you got to have a top 3 must-have, and then we can kind of work backwards and say, is this going to be your forever home? Is this an intermediary home? Is this going to be a home you're in for 10 years, then you're going to move out of state again? So once you can narrow down that list to a top 3, then when we actually go to see the houses, usually what I tell my buyers is there's a 1 to 10 scale. 10 being I would have bought it yesterday, and 1 being heck no. So obviously if we're going to go view the property, it's not a heck no. So I tell my buyers all the time, if you can find a home that both of you agree on, that's an 8 or higher, I say bid on it and go for it all day. But if it is like a 6 or a 7 or even a 5, and there are some of those top 3 things that are missing, then we can move the search along and look to the next one. Tip number 3 is going to be on negotiating. Now, I won't lie to you, especially because we have low inventory and high competition and people moving here every day, there's a good chance if you're looking at a house that just came on this weekend, it's probably going to be under contract by Monday. So if we find a house that you love and there are multiple offers on it, the typical conversation I have with a buyer about negotiating is going to be on one of 3 points. The first one is going to be inspection. The second one is going to be appraisal, and the third one is going to be your loan objection. Now, there are a ton more things that you can object for, but I'm going to focus on these 3 for negotiation reasons. Okay, so starting with the first one of the inspection. Now, I don't ever recommend you not having an inspection, but just because you waive your right to terminate does not mean that you can't still have an inspection. So even if you say, hey, we're going to take inspection off the table and we won't ask for anything once we're under contract, I still want you to have that inspection to make sure you feel comfortable moving forward. The second thing we'll talk about under negotiations is appraisals. So let's say we're bidding on a house that's $800,000. Let's say we know there's going to be multiples and we've talked to the listing agent and we've got all of their terms out of the way, but we come up with a number of, let's just say, $850 for now. So what's also required in the additional provisions in the contract is going to be a statement surrounding appraisal gap language. And what that means is if there's a gap between the price that you offered and the price that it gets appraised at, you will be required to pay that gap. Now, required is a tough term because you don't have to do it. No one's saying you have to do this, but if you want to win, you're gonna need to accept that appraisal gap language. And now we can try to put a cap on it and say, I'll only pay up to $20,000 or $50,000 in appraisal gap language. But again, it's just gonna make the terms harder to negotiate. So with an appraisal gap language, again, let's say it was $800,000 was the list price, you bid $850,000, you won, the appraisal comes in at $825,000, so now you have a $25,000 gap. If it wasn't in the top market, I would definitely say maybe leave that out, and there are definitely circumstances where we could try to leave that out, but absolutely in a multiple offer situation, this is going to be very necessary because especially in this market, we're seeing this go 15% over, 20% over, 35% over, because again, high competition and limited inventory definitely make for a highly competitive market. So if we can get a handle on these terms, especially with the appraisal gap language, it can help the seller feel more confident to accept your offer. And the third thing that we'll just talk about briefly is the loan contingency. So again, I never recommend waiving any of these unless we're in a very specific and negotiating situation where you really want the house and you feel really comfortable with it. And this will be the last objection as well too. So in a 30-day period from the start, it'll start with inspection and then we'll move to appraisal, and the final one, the closest to closing, will be your loan contingency. The last thing that you can object for to get your earnest money back. So in a lot of cases, do I recommend this? No, but in multiple offer situations, sometimes waiving this loan contingency can really help it look like cash, because at the end of the day, it's all cash to the sellers, but it's the contingencies that really hold them up and make them nervous about the offer not going through. So the stronger we can make those terms, and the more that we can have the buyer feel secure that even if there are hiccups along the way, that we're going to work through these, it's going to help your offer get accepted. Tip number 4 is something I call recalibrating. So let's say you didn't win. So let's say that $800,000 offer, $800,000 list price, you bid $850,000 and the winner, bid was $875,000. Now, I'm okay with you losing that one because $875,000, it can get pretty steep. So I'm with you guys, I wouldn't pay $875,000 for the house. So in this case, it's not really a lose situation because, everything happens for a reason. So in this case, what I do is we'll go back to the kind of drawing board and we'll talk about your research. Maybe we'll talk about your price point and see if we can wiggle it up or wiggle it down. And we could talk about, homes that have been on the market just a little bit longer than maybe a week or 2 weeks, and maybe it's something that wasn't on your list of top 3 things, but something maybe has an adjustment that can be made. We can knock down a wall or maybe do some renovations to make the kitchen look a little bit nicer, and maybe you get something at a lower price point as well too. So again, I'll just reiterate, this market is extremely competitive and extremely low inventory. So if we don't win on your first bid, there is a way that we can start to recalibrate this conversation. Maybe it's the neighborhood, maybe it's the price point, maybe it's the style of house you want, and we can start to expand the horizons and we can start to look deeper into and find more inventory than what's just available and coming off the market in a single weekend. Tip number 5 is going to be on what happens once you're under contract. So let's say, again, you list price $800,000, $850,000, you win. It's your house. Now what happens? Okay. So from start to finish, once they accept your offer, you have 3 days to deposit the earnest money. The earnest money is typically 1% of the asking price. Sometimes it can be a little higher. It just depends on what it is. And sometimes people even negotiate with this point. But in this market, it's just about how serious you are. So if you want that earnest money to be $50,000, if you want to be $100,000, this is a great negotiating thing that we can do. But really, it would be better to, what we say, make your earnest money go hard right away, which means non-refundable. So let's say the earnest money is $10,000 and one of your terms is that you actually put in there that this earnest money goes hard the day after inspection. Because from this point of view, from the buy side, if you know that you're okay with the inspection and you're ready to move forward, then the earnest money is hard as it is. You're not getting it back. But also know that when we finally close, and this will be between you and your lender, where you want that earnest money to go. So let's say it is a $25,000 earnest money payment. You can put that towards your mortgage. You can put that towards your closing costs, or you can take it all back in cash. Now, what people mostly do is put it towards the closing costs, and then the extra goes towards the loan. But again, all these decisions are up to you. And when we do go through your specific house, we'll go through all this in excruciating detail. But for now, let's say your earnest money goes hard the day after inspection. So once the inspection comes and goes, we're going to want to get that inspection done before the actual inspection objection deadline, so we can have time to review it, and we can have time to chat about it and chat with the other side about what we're going to do about it. Now, best case scenario, there's nothing on it. Best case scenario, it's just a couple minor things, under $1,000. It's no big deal, cosmetic things. You know, we're not asking people to change light bulbs. We're not asking people to, you know, swap out door handles. But there's some major things on there, and then we can renegotiate it from there. Let's say the hot water tank, you know, is way past its service life, and you want a credit of $5,000 moving forward. Okay, this will all ideally happen within the first week. And then from there, the next thing we're waiting on is your loan officer to say what the appraisal came back in at. So then we can really get into that. Do we even need the appraisal gap language? Or a lot of times, especially in this market, when the appreciation is so high, sometimes they even waive, the lender will just waive the actual appraisal. And then from there, the final one is the loan contingency. And then once we get beyond that and everyone's got the thumbs up and everyone's got the green lights, then we come to closing day, which is the easiest day out of all of them, except you got to get your hand ready to be signing a lot of documents, especially if there is a loan. So again, as far as the closing tips, just make sure you understand your timeline and work with your realtor very closely to make sure you understand all these dates and deadlines, because once you're under contract, things can tend to move very quickly. And from my point of view as a realtor, I want to make sure that you get enough time to understand all the details so that you can know that you made a solid decision on moving forward with this house. And now for a bonus tip for all of you that stuck around to watch the end of my video is to watch my next video on how to hire a realtor in Boulder, Colorado, because you're gonna need some great representation when you get here. So make sure you know the ins and outs of how to hire a realtor in Boulder, Colorado. So if you're in the market to buy a home in the Boulder County area, you're going to want to check out my next video where I give you the best home inspection checklist so you can have a stress-free inspection. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe and we'll see you in the next one.